Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court and CPS issues. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and today I've got a great guest. Her name is Barb Schroeder. Barb works with families who are experiencing alienation. She is a certified reunification coach, Ohio Supreme Court Mediator, guardian ad litem and parenting coordinator. Although Barb works in the court system, her emphasis is working with families that the court system has failed, helping alienated parents find stability, strategies for reaching out to their adult children, and preparing them for reunification are just some of the things she focuses on with her clients. Barb would be happy to work with you, and we're going to talk about all of that. And how are you doing this evening, Barb?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on today.
I'm glad to have you on. You have a lot to say. We have a lot to learn from you. And I was going to ask you, how do you become an Ohio Supreme Court mediator?
It's a process of coursework that's taken. So it's offered through the state, and there are certain processes, classes that you need to take, and then you end up being certified as a mediator.
Mm-hmm. So with these parents where the court system has failed them, I'm sure there's many people out there. How do you handle all these people where the system failed?
Right. Well, unfortunately, that seems to be happening more and more. We're seeing that the courts, between mental health and the legal system, they don't seem to understand the dynamic and what's happening and how to identify it and how to handle it properly within the court system. So most of my clients come to me and they have children between the ages of 18 and 30. And they tell me their, often sad stories of how they did their best with the court system, but they either had mental health professionals or legal health professionals that didn't help to move them forward. And a lot of these parents have been treated very unjustly in that system. So a lot of my work is just in coming up with new strategies that don't deal with the court system or even mental health providers to say, how can we still reach out to these kids and how can we make a successful reunion?
Mm-hmm. Now, if someone wants to reach you for help, do they just email you, or do you have a website?
I do have a website. You can go to, there's actually two. One is more of a communication arm and one is more of a coaching arm of my practice. So they can either go to Together Again Coaching and reach me there, or they can go to the Bridge for Us, and it's the bridge, the number 4 us.com. They can contact me by my email address, which is my name, Barb Schroeder 864@yahoo.com, or my phone number as well, 440-221-1866.
Okay, that's wonderful. When these people come to you and, what if they say it's been 4 years, there's no hope?
That's often where they come to. And, well, a lot of these parents, I can see where they're in a place where they haven't had hope. They haven't had appropriate help. So one of the things we work on first is just kind of a stabilization piece. And I think a lot of parents who have been through this are, a lot of them are financially drained, mentally and emotionally exhausted, feeling like that they've done everything they can and yet still no communication. Mm-hmm. So, we take a step back. I do, a kind of a history on these people and find out what they've done, what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't. And then together we come up with new strategies. These are often really creative approaches to reaching out to their children, and pulling up things from the past that would make a connection with their child, or even pulling people in. Some of these people who are kind of outsiders, they may be mutual friends or family, that can help make a bridge between a parent and a child.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. A lot of, the people, their families don't want to get involved. Mm-hmm. Their cousins, they may ask their cousin, hey, can you send a card to my son or whatever, and they just won't get involved.
Right. And that's a common thing. And coach parents on that to understand that you, in a couple ways, you don't, obviously in the big way, you don't want them to cut off a relationship with that cousin or that family member who may be trying to reach out. So it's an acknowledgement of that. It's saying, hey, listen, I know that you still communicate with my son or daughter, as the alienated parent, and I don't want to jeopardize your relationship with them. So what are some things you could do? What are some ways that cousin, that, aunt, uncle, someone in that position could still be kind of a positive influence without being that direct, they're not passing along notes or gifts or that type of thing. What's another way that they could just communicate that you are a safe and healthy parent and worthy of having a relationship with them? And we talk about dealing with it in that way, not as much of a messenger of information, but as a transfer of information about that parent in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, how difficult is this? The reunification process. It can take years. Yeah.
It can. And, one of the first things I tell my clients is a lot of these parents feel like if they're not reaching out to communicate with their child, that they're not getting anywhere, that they're not trying. Most of these people are people who are doers. They feel like if they're not actually physically doing something, that they're not they're not working towards that goal of reunification. But what parents need to understand is that they need to do a lot of work on themselves before they can get to that point. And I think one of the biggest fallacies I see in alienation is that parents say, I will be okay once my child returns.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of it is, they need to be okay before their children return. And if you think about it, these kids are most likely to come back in a very unstable place. They've been affected by an alienator in a very negative way. They're confused, they're angry, they're dealing with all of these issues. And if you as a parent haven't been able to deal with those things yourself, how are you supposed to help your child? So I tell my clients, if you always be reaching out in some form to your child, even if it's infrequent, but your main work in reuniting with your child is in you and getting you to that place where you are emotionally stable, mentally, financially. You have stability in your life across all those areas, so that when your child does return, you can have a successful reunification. I've seen a lot of parents who aren't there and their child tries to return and there's a little bit of communication and it's mishandled. A parent wasn't emotionally prepared for that child coming back. And even though there was a start, there wasn't a happy finish to that because they couldn't continue that communication in a healthy way because they themselves weren't healthy.
Okay. Like, do you ever have the kids come to you that have been alienated?
Yes, I have had communication with alienated kids, and most of them, again, are angry or upset. They tend to stand their ground in whatever they're doing, but we work together to try to just create an open line of communication. We set up boundaries. A lot of these kids are very hesitant to communicate with a parent. They're very concerned about an alienating parent being involved. How do I balance trying to reach out to a targeted parent and still dealing with an alienating parent? And they don't even know how to deal with that. They don't know how to go back to a person who's still an alienator in their lives and to be able to communicate to them in a healthy way that they're trying to establish a relationship with this new parent. It's very confusing and very sticky, but there are proper ways to handle that, and I have helped kids navigate that route.
Do you find that they feel a lot of guilt?
It's a wide range of emotions, and I think it's a process. We talk about things like grief as a process. I really believe that reunification is a process also, because these kids, if they're communicating with me, there is a certain openness to trying to restore a relationship. And so it might start with hesitancy, and then as their eyes are open to things, there can be guilt. Some of these kids will say that they really didn't do anything wrong and that they were justified in rejecting a parent, and now they're willing to give this parent a try, like putting on some kind of new pair of shoes or something.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where it starts sometimes, and the relationship has to build over time. And again, this is where it's really important for a parent to have that stability, because they'll feel like, hey, my child started talking to me and I'm feeling like they're treating me like like I'm on the back burner of life. I don't have much value. And if you're prepared for that, for it to start that way and for you to build on that, then you can have success. But if it's a couple weeks into it and you still feel like you're just the parent who's always going to be on the side, then, it gets discouraging and it's harder to stay with it.
Hmm. Sometimes these parents get their hopes up when they meet with their child and they think it's going to go somewhere,
Hmm.
and then their child, I hate to say adult, a young
Yep.
adult,
Yep.
they'll ghost out,
Hmm.
and then the parents back to feeling discombobulated, and it's upsetting.
Hmm. Again, that's why I work with parents on what does the road of reunification looks like. This is a bumpy road. Some people, it's like, we kind of have a joke that it's like, well, if you think alienation is hard, try reunification. It's very
Wow. Okay.
challenging. It is, it's always worth it. And it's always something you want to do. But, I think some alienated parents have this vision of their child showing up at a front door crying and saying, oh, I'm sorry. I realized what happened. Now I'm 100% loyal to you. And that's just not how it looks most of the time.
Hmm.
So preparing these parents for what that journey is going to look like is really important. Things like, if they've been around a narcissist for a long time, they may have taken on some gestures or some voice tones of those alienators. And so those can be triggers for a targeted parent that's trying to restore. So, what does that look like when something like that, you're not expecting it, and your child has some gesture or some words or whatever it might be that reminds you of the alienating person, and you have to be prepared to how you're going to handle that. Things like, hey, a child comes back, hey, mom or dad, yes, I'm happy to be back in your life, but just so you know, I'm going to be spending every holiday, every Christmas, whatever holiday it might be, with this other parent still, with this alienating parent. That's something that's kind of a stab in the back, but how do we deal with that? So lots of these things can be, if a parent is kind of expecting what that road is going to look like, then they can successfully navigate those conversations and what that's going to look like. And where's my part in that? Where do I kind of stand my ground and say, no, I'd really like to spend some time with you, and where do you have to let things go, and what the balance of that is. And so that's a lot of what I do in my coaching practice.
Hmm. Now, I'm sure you're really busy now because of graduations.
Hmm.
We've made it through Mother's Day, and now Father's Day is
Right.
approaching.
Right. It's a tough thing. And I remind all parents, alienated moms and dads, that you are an excellent parent. If you're even listening to this, you are an excellent parent. It's easy for any child to love a parent that loves them back, but how much more difficult is it to love a child that's not expressing that love to you right now? And so you look at a lot of families with, parents and kids that love each other, but how many of those parents would still be in it if their children treated them like your child is treating you? A lot of these parents would have given up, to tell their kids to take a hike, and so if you're still in this, and a lot of you have been in it for a long time, I know you are an excellent parent. You are above a lot of these other parents. So just know that in your heart and have confidence in that fact. But I try to do, again, that's only one thought. That's a good thought to camp out on during those special, like a birthday, or certainly Mother's Day, or now Father's Day coming. But the other thing you have to try to do is look for something else to celebrate, someone else to celebrate. So instead of taking this moment to make the day all about you, which is kind of the world's version of what it should be, all about a mom or all about a dad in this case, try to find a father figure. If you have a father, if you have a father-in-law, stepfather, some person in that role, or even who's been a father figure, celebrate that person. We can still have
Mhm.
joy on those days in celebrating other people. Sometimes I think there's a greater joy in celebrating those people. So celebrate those people. Maybe it's a day, if you can't be with that special man on the day, maybe you do a project on that day as a gift to him of some sort, or take in an activity or something like that. Sometimes there are lots of little boys who don't have dads. So maybe get involved in a community group that has a father figure type person for a young man, and maybe step in and be kind of a mentor to him, or
Mhm.
a helper in some way in his life, and find your your gratification and your appreciation through that relationship. And then sometimes it just comes down to distraction. Sometimes it's staying away from social media right
Mhm.
around that time. Too often we dwell on the reminders of all that it is. And sometimes it's just okay to turn off the media, to
Mhm.
turn away from it. If something comes on that you see or hear, you don't have to soak it all in. It's okay to just turn it off and go away from it and distract yourself with something healthy that you enjoy.
Mhm.
So those are all some strategies on how to deal with it and make the day. It doesn't have to be a horrible day. It can still be a great day. You can determine that no matter what the day is on the calendar, it's going to be a great day for you.
Mhm. Most definitely. And it's good to have the outlook. What helped me was to go out into the world, like into my job, and make someone else happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it does change your mental attitude, believe it or not.
Yes. Yes, it does. We underestimate the power of putting others above ourselves. And so, we want to make those birthdays and these holidays, we all want it to be very self-focused. And I remind parents too that, that whole self-focus is what a narcissistic parent does. And it would be natural on a day like Father's Day or Mother's Day to want to feel honored in some special way. But we have to be careful that we're not so sensitive to it that we take on a little bit of narcissism in that and want to just make that day all about ourselves, and we're just going to sit in the slump down that day and give up on the day if we can't have our way and be the parent on that day. It's great for us to make it about someone else.
Mhm. Mhm. And I know you say, like, to send a gift, or should you not send a gift, when there's, say, for instance, graduations and
Mhm.
things like that. I mean, how would you get a gift to an alienated child when no one will help you get the gift to them? I
Right.
guess it's.
Right. It all depends, all different parents have different levels of contact. To some kids are actually communicating with them very little, to I don't have anything. I don't have an address. I don't have a phone number. I don't have an email. I have nothing. And especially with these kids in college, because colleges are very protective of this kid's information, and they won't give you can call, your child's local university, and most of them will not give you any information about your child.
Mhm.
The kids at colleges and universities now can actually sign a waiver saying who they would like to be included in their information. And if your name is not on that, and obviously as an alienated parent, you probably wouldn't be, the university can't give you access to any of that. So it can be a really tricky point.
Mhm.
The best thing you can do on that day, if there's any way that you can get involved in it, to be involved. If you can't, it's okay. You can. One of the things that some of the parents I know have done is to set up a bank account for their child, and they've put money away for birthdays, holidays, graduations, any of those things. If they can't access their child, they still are thinking of them and making those deposits. And, at some point, we look for a break in it, that if there is an opening in communication, to even send a bank statement, you can cross out the number, just photocopy it and cross out a number. But so your child can see that all along you were thinking of them. You did the best you could by setting money aside, by honoring them on that day. I have one parent who even still writes a card. She has a file, and she still on their birthday or still on Christmas, she can't send it to them because she can't get it to them, but she sends a file. And I think the beautiful thing about that is that when I look towards the day of reunification and that time when it comes, what a beautiful thing to be able to sit down and share that, hey, even though I couldn't physically reach out to you, you were still on my mind and on my heart. And these were some of the things I wanted to share with you at the time. I'm so glad that now I can share some of these things with you.
Mhm. And I'm sure weddings have to be hard because when you don't get to speak to your child, or if you're kind of speaking to your child,
Hmm.
and then maybe you are invited, but you're going into an area where there are people that really don't want you there.
Right. And it can be a very awkward situation. And I want to remind all parents out there too that if this is your child's graduation or your child's wedding, your job is just to be, if you're being welcomed in a slight way or not at all, your job is just to be an observer on that day. I have too many parents who, their child cracks open the door and invites them to something, and then they've made that day now all about them. They've made that day about, I want to make sure I'm known at the wedding and I get my pictures and I get my everything. If this is just your crack into the communication and just your first steps in, these first communications or times together are very fragile. These need to be handled very delicately. Any communication that takes place, any time together, just very gently. So focus that day on, what can I do to take in this day and to make it special for my child? Maybe on that day, you're going to take some, if you do get invited to a wedding, to take a bunch of pictures and put them together in some kind of little album. Yes, your child will most likely have a professional photographer and get pictures, but even if they receive a little album from you of just pictures you took and snapshots of other people and things on that day that maybe a photographer wouldn't catch, that might be a sweet thing to be able to send to your child in an electronic form, or even in an old fashioned, putting the pictures in a little book to look at. Sometimes I think things like that keep you present in a child's life. If they had a little book like that they would put out on a coffee table or something, and it had these like little random wedding photos, it might be a good reminder of you. So think about ways that you can make it really special about their day, and take it in as that observer that you've been invited to be, without making it all about you, not forcing your way to the front or making a production about yourself on that day, but just being willing to take the seat that they've given you.
Mm-hmm. And do you find some parents say, "Oh, I don't know if I can even go to a wedding or graduation," you
Mhm.
know?
It's very hard and it can be very hurtful, but if you are invited, if your child opens the door to that opportunity, I would do everything I could to get yourself. And again, this is where you need to be emotionally healthy and stable, because it could be easy to fall apart, and you may fall apart, and that's okay after you're away from them. So I know parents who've gone to graduations and they kept it together because they were sitting in the stands with everybody else, and they got in the car and completely lost it. And that's fine. There's no point in faking that this is a really happy moment for you. Um, those times in life that are life defining moments, like graduations and weddings, you have missed out on. Chances are maybe your whole child's high school or college experience or whole dating experience with this other person that they're marrying now. It's hard to fake that it's a wonderful time for you. It's okay. Again, this is a good reason why you can kind of just be that silent observer. I recommend that parents take a picture of themselves at that event and
Mhm.
make sure that you're not doing anything to make it a rocky moment for your child.
Mhm.
Even reassuring them, if there is an invitation, say, thank you so much for inviting me. I just want you to know I'm happy to be there. I know that this may be awkward in reaching out to you, so I'll wait for you to come to me on this special day. And if you don't find an opportunity to come over to me, that's fine. I
Mhm.
get that. I understand it may be a challenging moment for you. I'll just be happy to be there.
Mhm. Mhm. When, these, weddings and graduations are going on, usually after a graduation, and even after a wedding, they usually have a house party afterwards.
Mhm,
And obviously, they'll probably go to the alienated parents' house for that.
mhm.
So I'm sure it's very hard when parents tell you, we had to go, we just went home.
Right. And they do. And again, this is where you have to understand where your place is in that day. Try to have a grateful attitude that you were invited to anything. There are a lot of
Mhm.
parents who don't get invited to anything. So again,
Mhm.
accept your place, make it about them. You can do a lot to build a relationship without forcing your way into that date and making it awkward for your child. And this is what, some kids will say. It's not even, alienated parents need to realize too that this isn't even necessarily about them. A lot of these kids are struggling with, what will the dynamic between the parent I might try to be opening to, the targeted parent to restore with, and my alienating parent. They don't even realize at that point maybe that it's an alienation. They just know, I know in this case, a case with a alienator being a dad, I just know that my dad hates my mom. And
Mhm.
I don't even hate my mom. I want her to be there. But the stress and the anxiety for me as the child in the middle is what the dynamic between them will look like. And I know that I can't tell my dad, in this case, not to be there or be a part of it. I can tell my mom not to be there to be a part of it. And it's not even about her. It's about how this is my special day, and I can't handle the stress of what might happen if the two of you are in the same room. And so parents need to understand that too, that your child isn't necessarily trying to leave you out of it. And maybe there's an opportunity, if you get invited, for you to say, hey, I would love to be able to celebrate with you just on our own time. So instead of making it about going to a party afterwards or celebration, offer your child an opportunity. Say, hey, I would love to take you to lunch one day to celebrate. Could we do that as part of our, after graduation celebration? And another day I could take you to lunch, or I could take you to dinner. And I would love to hear more about your graduation experience and hear about, the other things that are going on in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just so hard for these parents, and these are things that shouldn't have happened to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the hard part too, in explaining this to anybody, because it's so far from normal that it's one of those, you can explain it to, and people can't even wrap your head around it. And it's so far from normal that you shouldn't. It's something that you shouldn't be able to explain because it's so far from what it should be. So that's okay. It's parents need to understand that it is something that goes against the psychology of a child. We know that even children who have been really physically abused, even burned and beaten by a parent, still want to have a relationship. They would still call them mom and dad. Parental alienation is the only scenario like that where a child would reject a parent and then even start calling them possibly by their first name. So we know that it's a major dysfunction.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it sure is. It's something that I'm sure has been going on for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And we have just caught on to this, maybe in the 40s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sure.
and then you have your work cut out for you, because you also offer, ways for these parents to have a healthy mindset while they're waiting to get back and reunify with their kids.
Right. And that's one of the things, we focus on. Part of that is just working on a lot of self things. So when I have my initial intake form for my clients, I have them rate themselves on a lot of different things. And two of the areas these parents struggle with the most are forgiveness, and they struggle with anger. And completely understandable. These people have been hurt, and it's usually by more than one person. They've not only been hurt by an alienator who at one point was someone they were committed to for the rest of their lives. They've been hurt by their children, who are half of who they are. They've probably lost their in-laws, any family on that side. We know how this alienation dynamic works, and it's a split in the whole family. So they've lost all that. They may have lost some of their own family members. Now they've entered most likely into a legal battle, and an attorney has failed them. There's an injustice there. Maybe even a guardian ad litem, or even a parenting coordinator, or a magistrate, or a judge. Maybe they've gone to legal health professionals, psychologists, family therapists, social workers, people who had come to get involved in this process who haven't seen it through justly either. So there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of room for forgiveness to help people. And one of the things I've found is that the people who are successful in reunifying with their kids have worked through these two particular issues. And what I've also found that's really interesting about this is that when these alienated kids come back, those are the two issues that they struggle with more than anything else. Because now they're coming back and they discover that they have a parent, an alienating parent, who has lied to them, who has not been honest about what happened, who they can see now was intentional about keeping them from another parent, which creates anger. And we know in order for them to have a healthy relationship with that alienating parent, now that they've discovered the truth, they're going to have to be able to forgive. And that's going to be a really hard forgive on their part, and a lot of anger to deal with. So, one of the focuses in my practice is going through all these qualities in a parent, but taking time to really dig deep into what that experience looks like, and to really deal with the anger and the forgiveness piece of that.
Mhm. Mhm. So these parents have to have a good mindset
Mhm.
and enjoy e- enjoy what time you have, when you cannot meet your child
Mhm.
or have
Right.
contact.
Right. And two, I think it's very easy. We live in a culture that's very absorbed with children, and that's great. We should be very attentive parents. But I think we've put so much focus on the role as a parent that we've forgotten that we have other roles. So before you had a child, you were a son or a daughter, you were a brother or a sister, a cousin, maybe an aunt and uncle, you were a neighbor, you were a friend, you were a coworker, you were a volunteer, you were all of these other roles. But somehow when we become parent, everything gets consumed in the role as parent, and you forget that you are all of these other things. So it's important that, that you kind of rediscover some of these other areas of your life that you are. I know I had one client and she said, more people called me, I was called mom more than I was called by my first name by anybody, because her life was so consumed about being a mom that
Mhm.
that was her identity. Her identity was in being a mom, and she had lost her identity as all these other friends. Some of her friendships had drifted away, her brothers and sisters had gotten farther away because she was so consumed. So it's important to take time to focus on those other roles and to really invest in those, and know that's, if you invested yourself in all of those roles, you wouldn't have enough time during the day to be good at all of them. So
Mhm.
it's just determining to say, you know what, I'm very hopeful about my kids coming back at some point, but in the meantime, who is in my life that I can invest in, and being willing to make the most of those opportunities to invest in the people around you.
Mhm.
Alienated parents suffer from this feeling of not being loved and valued, but at the same time, they want to be loved and valued by their kids, and their kids aren't present right now to be able to do that. So invest yourself, your love and your time and your energy in other people. It will come back to you. You will be loved. You will be accepted. You will be acknowledged as a person of value, but you're going to have to go to a different source other than your children to do that so that you can receive it back.
Mhm. What is the one thing that you find alienated parents getting stuck on? Like they just can't get past or move past?
hmm A lot of it, I think, is this injustice piece. They keep reiterating the stories of, this attorney or this guardian ad litem or my ex-spouse or my ex-in-laws or whatever it might be. And they struggle with that injustice that keeps coming back to it, the stories of what happened, the conversations they had with their kids, the nasty letters their children have written to them, the horrible phone calls, and it seems like that's the replay in their mind constantly. And so, one of the things is breaking that cycle, and one of the things I help parents with is, if a thought of your child comes into your mind and it's a healthy thought and it makes you smile and it makes you happy and you could be thankful, then keep that thought. But if you have a thought of your child that comes into your head and it creates anxiety or stress or a negative emotion of some sort, then you don't have to keep it there. You don't have to allow that to come into your mind. And just like I tell parents, I said, if a burglar showed up at your front door and wanted to come in and take your most valuable items, you wouldn't just let a burglar come in and steal it. And in the same way, these negative thoughts are standing at your door, waiting to come in and steal your joy, your peace, your happiness, your self-esteem, your all these good things. You don't have to let it in the door of your mind. You
Mhm.
can say, you know what, no, I'm not going to let that in. And it's a training of your mind to be able to say no to those things and then to open the door to the positive good things. We know the old adage, whatever you feed grows. So if you
Mhm.
constantly find yourself feeding these negative thoughts and emotions and letting your mind continue down these rants of things that have happened, you're going to find yourself in a very negative place.
Mhm.
So it's really gaining control of that, determining, being aware, hey, this is not a good train of thought for me right now. I'm rehashing what happened. I'm going through that court date again. I'm going
Mhm.
through that moment that my ex said that. I'm replaying what my child did. I'm pulling up a letter and reading it that my child, a negative letter that they've given me 2 years ago. why are you doing this? It's
Right.
not helpful. So it's been training your mind to do that, and then investing yourself in something positive. It's not just a saying no to the negative, it's finding the positive to fill it. So it's
Mhm.
important that if you're going to say no to a negative thought, that you say yes to a positive one, and you have to work hard sometimes to come up with that positive replacement is going to be.
Mhm. Well, I've always said, don't let anyone live rent free in your head.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's hard when it's your child and you think about, when they were little or, what happened later and parents have to just focus on moving forward and finding something to do in the meantime.
Right. And that looks like, too, along these same lines, I hear a lot of parents say that they're trying, well, I've tried that. I've tried that. So we'll talk about this kind of new mindset. I'm trying, I'm trying. And I found that a lot of people um, don't see a difference between trying and training. So I try to put a spin on it that people can understand in an athletic way. That if
Mhm.
you are someone who's training for, let's say, a marathon, you don't just try to run a marathon, you train to run a marathon. And there's a difference. Trying is kind of this weak attempt. Trying seems to imply like, well, I tried, like it's this I gave up easily kind of thing. It's easier to give up on a try. But when you're training like an athlete, you have to have a plan. You have to be determined. There's this gut determination, this grit set that says, you know what, I don't care how hard it is, I'm going to push through. I'm going to run that extra mile. I'm going to go a little faster. At the end of it, I'm going to be exhausted and it's going to be hard. But you know what? I'm going to accomplish my goal if I do that. And so, in the same way, when these parents do things like try a mindset or working on some of these other qualities, on forgiving or anger, it's got to be a determined effort that says, I'm going to stick with it even if it's hard. And if whatever strategy we're using isn't working, we can always modify the strategy to get them to the same goal. But it's important to just, not just feel like you have this flimsy attempt. It's got to be some guts behind it. And again, this is a quality that alienated parents need to learn, because this is something their children have not seen, most likely.
Mhm.
They've been told what to think as an alienated child. They haven't had this critical thinking and all of these things that they need. And so we need to be at this place where we are now standing with determination. We've been through that. We've overcome that hill. So when our kids get there and they come to us and they're like, well, I tried to make things work, or I tried to reach out to your, no, no, no. There's a difference between trying and training. Are we training to have a successful relationship, or are we just trying? And to talk about the difference and what it's going to take to actually get to that goal. And chances are trying's not going to get us there. It's going to take more than that.
Mhm. Most definitely. Is there any last words you'd like to offer parents that are, in despair of these graduations and
Mhm.
upcoming weddings?
Yeah, it's a difficult time of year. Just be willing. I always say just acknowledge the awkward. Acknowledge that it's a hard time. Just say, you know what? Yeah, it's a hard time. It is. And we're bombarded with it, with so many landmark moments in kids' lives coming up. Just
Mhm.
take a deep breath, take it day by day, know that you'll get through it. Find somebody to celebrate. Again, we have this very narrow focus. Maybe there's someone else who's a teenager in your neighborhood or at your church or in a place where you work that you could celebrate. Hey, Ashley is graduating down the street. Why don't I do something special for her? Just try to take that focus off of how much that day is hurting you, and try to take that same depth of hurt and create that same depth of joy in someone else's life. And
Mhm.
it can really turn a day around. Is it going to totally take away from the fact that you're not celebrating that day with your child? No, it's not. That's there. That stings and it hurts, and that's where it is. But it doesn't have to be to the depth of that pain if you can make that day about somebody else. So do that, and know that there is help. There is hope. There are reunifications. And I find that the parents who are prepared for it handle it, and they're successful with it. And it's a little bumpy road, but it's a road that's worth it. And I know parents can get there.
Mhm. Well, I really appreciate you coming on to my show. It's been great having you, and I know
Thank
you've got to get moving here, but
Yes,
I'd like to have you back on sometime.
thank you.
Okay.
It's been great. I'm so happy to talk to you, and thank you for doing your part and reaching out and helping folks, because I've always said I think this is one of the most painful things that anybody can ever go through. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really important for us to come together as a community to understand it better, to make sure that we're making progress in the courts and the mental health fields, and that we're doing all that we can to let parents know that things can get better. They can still have a happy and healthy life while they're going through alienation, and live with the hope that they will be reunified with their kids.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms that in turn perpetuate parental alienation. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again here with Barb and other guests here coming up. Thank you so much, Barb.
Thank you.